Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became the heir to Tony Stark's tech legacy. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was muted, the vibrant colors of late afternoon bled into a palette of bruised purples and weary grays. Or perhaps it was just Izuku Midoriya's perception. Each step he took on the cracked pavement was a monumental effort. His bright red sneakers, usually a symbol of his aspiration to walk in the footsteps of heroes, felt like blocks of lead. The straps of his yellow backpack, one of them scorched black from a close encounter with Bakugo's explosive temper, dug into his shoulders, but he barely registered the physical discomfort. It was nothing compared to the hollow cavern that had been carved out in his chest. All Might's words echoed in that cavern, a relentless, soul-crushing reverberation. It's not wrong to dream. But you need to be realistic. The memory was sharp, painful, and overwhelmingly real. The wind whipping at them on the rooftop, the skeletal, sunken form of his idol, the plume of steam and the desperate, pleading question that had tumbled from Izuku's lips after a lifetime of holding it in. Can I be a hero, even without a quirk? The answer had been a gentle execution. No, I don't think you can become a hero without a quirk. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, a fresh wave of nausea washing over him. He had spent his entire life clinging to a single, brilliant thread of hope in a world that had told him he was less than. He had analyzed heroes, studied quirks, filled notebook after notebook with theories and strategies, all in the desperate belief that knowledge and heart could somehow compensate for the genetic lottery he had lost at birth. And All Might, the symbol of peace, the very embodiment of that hope, had taken that thread and decisively snipped it. The city sounds were a distant drone, the rumble of a train, the chatter of pedestrians, the distant wail of a siren. He had walked past the site of the sludge villain incident. The crowds had mostly dispersed, leaving behind singed asphalt, shattered storefronts, and the lingering, acrid smell of burnt sugar from the villain's body. He had seen Bakugo being checked over by paramedics, looking more furious than relieved, surrounded by pro-heroes praising his powerful quirk and his resilience. No one had praised Izuku. He had been scolded, berated for his recklessness. His legs had moved on their own, a desperate, instinctual act of heroism that everyone, including All Might, had dismissed as suicidal foolishness. He was the quirkless kid who got in the way. That was his role. That was his reality. By the time he reached the familiar door of his small apartment, the sun had nearly sunk below the skyline, casting long, skeletal shadows that seemed to claw at the buildings. He fumbled with his keys, his hands trembling. The door swung open to reveal his mother, Inko Midoriya, her face etched with a frantic worry that melted into profound relief the moment she saw him. Izuku! Oh, thank goodness! I saw the news! That villain attack was so close to your school. I was so worried. She rushed forward, her hands fluttering around him, checking for injuries. I'm fine, Mom, he mumbled, the words tasting like sawdust. He couldn't meet her gaze. He couldn't bear to see the reflection of his own failure in her loving eyes. She must have sensed the profound shift in his demeanor. The usual bubbling excitement, the frantic muttering about the day's hero sightings. It was all gone, replaced by a crushing, silent weight. She led him inside, her expression softening with concern. I made your favorite, she said, her voice a gentle attempt to breach his walls. Katsudon. To celebrate you being safe. He sat at the small dining table, staring down at the bowl. The breaded pork cutlet and soft scrambled egg over rice, usually a source of immense comfort and joy, looked alien to him. He picked up his chopsticks and took a bite. It was tasteless. He felt his mother's worried gaze on him throughout the meal. He knew she was waiting for him to talk, to unload the day's burdens, but the words were trapped behind a lump in his throat so large he felt he might suffocate. Finally, after pushing the half-eaten bowl away, he couldn't hold it in any longer. A single, hot tear escaped and slid down his cheek, followed by another, and then another. Izuku? What is it? What happened? Inko asked, her voice trembling with empathy. He looked up, his vision blurred, and the dam broke. He said I couldn't. He choked out, the words ragged and broken. All Might. I met him. And he told me I couldn't be a hero. Inko's face crumpled. She rushed to his side, wrapping him in a fierce hug. He buried his face in her shoulder and sobbed, the raw, guttural sounds of a life's dream dying. She held him, murmuring the same words she had when he was 4 years old, crying in front of the computer after the doctor had given them the news. I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm so sorry. Later, in his room, the despair settled into a cold, heavy numbness. His sanctuary, a shrine to heroism, had become a monument to his own inadequacy. The Silver Age All Might poster on his ceiling, with its beaming, indomitable smile, seemed to mock him. The rows of meticulously organized hero figurines on his shelves felt like a legion of silent accusers. The notebooks, filled with his life's work, were just the pathetic ramblings of a delusional child. He slumped into his desk chair, the squeak of the casters loud in the suffocating silence. He stared at his reflection in the dark computer monitor, a plain-faced boy with a wild mop of green hair and tear-tracked cheeks. A nobody. A Deku. Useless. He reached a trembling hand towards the hero analysis for the future number 13 notebook, its pages still damp and warped from the koi pond. He was going to put it away. Put it all away, the posters, the figures, the dream. It was time to be realistic. It was in that moment of absolute surrender that reality decided to tear itself apart. A soft hum, so low it was felt more than heard, vibrated through the room. It wasn't coming from his computer or any of his electronics. It was a clean, pure tone, like a tuning fork struck in a vacuum. Izuku's head snapped up. Through the closed glass of his bedroom window, an object was emerging. It wasn't breaking the glass. It was passing through it as if the solid pane were nothing more than a soap bubble. It was a perfect sphere, about the size of a baseball, forged from a material that looked like polished chrome and liquid starlight. It had no seams, no buttons, no visible technology, yet it moved with clear, silent intent. Izuku froze, his heart hammering against his ribs, a primal fear momentarily eclipsing his despair. A villain? Some new kind of quirk? This fear drifted silently to the center of his room and hovered at his eye level. A slit of azure light appeared on its surface, widening into a soft, analytical band that swept over him. The light was not intrusive or harsh, it felt inquisitive. It lingered on his face, his trembling hands, the tear stains on his shirt, and then on the All Might poster behind him. The low hum intensified slightly, a note of what felt like confirmation. Then, the air in front of the sphere shimmered, like heat haze on a summer road. Pixels of blue light coalesced, swirling and weaving together with impossible speed. Within seconds they formed a three-dimensional, life-sized figure. It was a man, projected in ghostly, translucent light. He was dressed in a casual black t-shirt and jeans, a faint, glowing circle visible through the fabric of his shirt. He had a sharply trimmed goatee, an air of relaxed confidence, and eyes that held a spark of roguish intelligence mixed with a deep, profound weariness. He looked around the room, his holographic gaze sweeping over the hero memorabilia with an expression of wry amusement. Well, I'll be, the man's projection said, his voice a smooth, charismatic baritone that filled the small room. It was an American accent, crisp and clear. Kid, you really went all in on the hero theme, huh? Kinda reminds me of my old buddy, Cap, little less stars and stripes, a lot more hair. Izuku could only stare, his jaw hanging open, his mind completely blank. He was either dreaming, hallucinating, or had finally, definitively lost his mind. The man's expression grew a little more serious. He met Izuku's wide, terrified eyes. If you're seeing this, he began, his tone shifting. Well, let's just say I didn't make it to my retirement condo in Tahiti. Which is a shame. I had a whole plan involving my ties and legally questionable robotics projects. Point is, I'm dead. Gone. Pushing up daisies. Erased from existence. You get the picture. He took a theatrical breath. The name's Tony Stark. I was a hero. I built things. Sometimes those two things were the same. After a few go-rounds with alien armies, genocidal robots of my own design, long story, and a particularly stubborn purple grape with a god complex, I came to a conclusion. one hero, one world isn't enough. There's always another threat. And what happens when the guy in the metal suit isn't around to answer the call? The holographic Stark gestured to the floating sphere. This is the Vanguard Protocol. My last will and testament, on a multiversal scale. A failsafe. I tasked my AI with creating a probe that could traverse realities, sift through the quantum foam, and find a very specific type of person in a world that could use a leg up. Izuku's brain, sluggish from grief, was now kicking into hyperdrive, desperately trying to process the flood of impossible information. Multiversal, traverse realities, quantum foam, these were theoretical concepts, the stuff of cutting-edge physics and science fiction. I gave the AI some very specific parameters. Stark continued, his voice losing its flippant edge and taking on a grave sincerity. It wasn't looking for the strongest, or the fastest, or the one with the flashiest powers. I've seen what that gets you. I was looking for something rarer. I was looking for a soul with the heart of a hero, the mind of an engineer, and zero, and I mean absolute zero, desire for personal glory. Someone who would build, not for applause, but because it's the right thing to do. Someone who would run into the fire, not because they're bulletproof, but because they have to help. The sphere behind Stark whirred softly. A small, grainy holographic window popped up next to the main projection, showing a shaky, bystander's eye view of the sludge villain incident from earlier that day. It showed a small, green-haired figure bursting from the crowd, a yellow backpack clutched in his hands. It showed him, Izuku, running headfirst towards an impossible monster to save the boy who had tormented him his entire life. Stark's ghostly image looked at the playback, then back at Izuku, a look of profound respect on his face. The probe has been observing your reality for a while now. Saw a lot of candidates. People with incredible power, doing incredible things. But then there was you. You, kid, with nothing but a school bag and a death wish, you ran in. While the so-called pro-heroes stood by, waiting for the right quirk, you acted. That right there, he said, pointing a translucent finger at the screen. That's the ballgame. That's everything. The AI detected a quantum signature of heroism so pure, so reckless, and so utterly selfless, it triggered the final protocol. The playback faded. Stark's image seemed to solidify slightly, his gaze locking with Izuku's. Congratulations, kid. You've been chosen. You are now the sole heir to the entirety of the Stark legacy. Izuku finally found his voice, a strangled, high-pitched squeak. What? Everything. Stark repeated, a faint smirk returning to his lips. All my research, my schematics, my theories on everything from advanced particle physics to clean energy. Every iteration of the Iron Man armor, from the clunky cave-built Mark I to the nanotech suit that was my magnum opus. My financial assets, which the AI has already converted from my accounts and liquidated into your local currency, should be a few 100 billion yen, give or take. Enough to get you started. And most importantly, my partner, he gestured again to the sphere. She'll be your guide. She contains a consciousness derived from my own AI systems, a true artificial intelligence designed to teach, assist, and manage the archives. The sphere pulsed with a soft, blue light. A calm, synthesized female voice, tinged with a faint British accent, spoke for the first time. Greetings, Izuku Midoriya. I am JOCSDA, just a rather comprehensive assistant for strategic triage and analysis. It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance. Izuku stumbled back, hitting his desk chair and collapsing into it. His mind was a maelstrom of shock, disbelief, and a terrifying, fragile flicker of something he hadn't felt in hours. Hope. This can't be real, he whispered, his eyes wide as dinner plates. This has to be a dream. Or a quirk. Someone's playing a prank on me, Stark's hologram chuckled. Kid, if this was a prank, the punchline would be way better. And trust me, I know good punchlines. This is real. As real as it gets. His image began to flicker, the light wavering. Looks like my recording is about to run out of juice. So listen up. This isn't a gift. It's a burden. It's a responsibility. The knowledge you now have access to can build wonders, but it can also build weapons of unimaginable destruction. The choice of what you do with it, that's all on you. I chose you because I believe you'll make the right one. His form grew more transparent, the edges dissolving into static. Don't be me. Be better. And for God's sake, try to have some fun. The world's always ending, no reason you can't enjoy the ride. With a final, confident smirk, the hologram of Tony Stark dissolved into a cascade of fading blue light, leaving only the silent, hovering sphere and a stunned, hyperventilating teenage boy. Silence descended upon the room once more, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was thick with potential, humming with the energy of 1,000 new possibilities. Izuku stared at the sphere, his chest rising and falling in ragged gasps. He slowly lifted a hand, reaching out to touch it. His fingers met a surface that was impossibly smooth and cool to the touch. It was real. JOCSDA? He whispered, the name feeling foreign on his tongue. I am here, Izuku. The AI replied, her voice emanating from the sphere itself. He said, the Stark Archive? All his knowledge? Correct. The entirety of Mr. Stark's unencrypted research and personal data has been indexed, and is now accessible to you. It is housed in a pocket-dimensional server tethered to my core programming. To you, it will feel like an instantaneous neural link, though I will act as a firewall to prevent cognitive overload. You may query any subject, a neural link. Pocket dimensions. This was technology so far beyond anything on Earth it might as well be magic. His mind, the analytical engine that had been his only weapon for so long, began to spin. The implications were staggering. Materials science. Propulsion systems. Computer science. Artificial intelligence. Energy production. He was drowning. Drowning in a sea of potential so vast he couldn't comprehend its depths. All his life, he had been defined by what he lacked. Now, he had been given everything. Everything except a quirk. The tool was different, but the fundamental problem remained. The ghost of All Might's words returned, a final, desperate gasp of his old despair. Asterisk. Pro-heroes are always risking their lives. I cannot simply say, you can be a hero without power. Asterisk. He looked down at his own hands, scarred from years of Bakugo's casual bullying, soft from a lack of physical training. These were not the hands of a hero. They were the hands of a boy who built models and wrote in notebooks. What could he possibly do with this impossible inheritance? The old, familiar question, the one that had defined his entire existence, rose from the depths of his soul. It was no longer a plea to an idol, but a desperate query to a ghost's legacy. His voice was a raw, trembling whisper, thick with the weight of 14 years of pain and a single, terrifying spark of renewed hope. He started, his throat tight. He swallowed hard and tried again, looking directly at the hovering sphere, at the legacy it represented. Can even I become a hero with this? There was a pause, a millisecond of processing that felt like an eternity. JOCSDA's voice, when it came, was devoid of pity or false encouragement. It was a statement of pure, unadulterated fact, based on the parameters set by her creator. According to Mr. Stark's primary directive and the core definitions of heroism he programmed, your actions today have already met the criteria. You already are one. Izuku's breath hitched. A sob, not of sadness but of overwhelming, earth-shattering validation, escaped his lips. The words he had longed to hear his entire life hadn't come from his idol, but from a machine from another universe. It didn't matter. They were true. Our mission, JOCSDA continued, her tone unchanging but somehow feeling deeply profound, is to provide you with the tools. As she spoke, a beam of soft blue light projected from the sphere onto the dark screen of his computer monitor. The screen flickered to life, not with his familiar operating system, but with a complex, three-dimensional holographic interface. Lines of code and complex data streams flowed in the background, but front and center, a single, intricate blueprint began to render itself. It was a circle, filled with an impossibly complex web of wiring, emitters, and containment fields, all revolving around a glowing core. Equations and material specifications he didn't recognize, but felt on some instinctive level he was about to understand, scrolled beside the diagram. At the top, in clean, block lettering, was the title, Arc Reactor, MK. Miniaturized, ***. Izuku stared at the schematic, at the pulsating blue heart of a new forged star displayed on his screen. The All Might poster on his wall still smiled down at him, a relic of a past dream, but Izuku's eyes were fixed forward, on the future. A future he would have to build with his own 2 hands. The tears were still wet on his cheeks, but for the first time in a long time, he was smiling. The journey would be dangerous, impossible, and terrifying, and it was just beginning. The sun rose on a world that was, for Izuku Midoriya, fundamentally altered. He had barely slept, his mind a roaring furnace of impossible data and terrifying potential. The blue glow of the arc reactor schematic on his computer monitor painted his room in the colors of a new dawn, a stark contrast to the faded, smiling image of All Might on his wall. The hero of his past was a static image. The future was a dynamic, endlessly complex blueprint. He sat cross-legged on the floor, the silver sphere, JOCASDA, hovering silently before him. The initial shock had receded, leaving behind a state of hyper-aware clarity. He was no longer just Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless dreamer. He was the heir to a legacy he couldn't begin to comprehend. JOCSDA, he began, his voice hoarse from a night of disbelieving whispers. The arc reactor, the materials listed here, palladium, gold, titanium alloys, proprietary wiring. I can't just buy these things. How do I even start? A logical primary query, Izuku. The AI's voice replied, calm and resonant. Mr. Stark's financial assets have been successfully liquidated into a series of encrypted, untraceable accounts. The current balance is equivalent to 432.8 billion yen. While this amount is sufficient to purchase the required materials, a sudden influx of high-grade components to a civilian address would attract undesirable attention. Izuku's eyes widened. He had heard the number yesterday, but it hadn't registered. It was an astronomical sum, a figure so large it was meaningless. But the AI's point was sharp and immediate. He couldn't just order parts for a supersuit to his mom's apartment. Therefore, we must proceed with Phase 1 of the Vanguard Protocol, resource acquisition and physical conditioning. I have cross-referenced local municipal records and satellite imagery. There is an ideal location that serves both purposes. Dagoba Municipal Beach. An image of the infamous trash heap appeared on his monitor. It was a local disgrace, a coastline choked with decades of illegally dumped garbage, from rusted cars to mountains of discarded appliances. The beach? Izuku asked, confused. Why there? The location contains vast quantities of salvageable raw materials, copper wiring from appliances, steel and aluminum plating from vehicles, rare earth magnets from discarded electronics, and potentially salvageable titanium from marine and aviation scrap. Furthermore, the physical act of clearing the area will serve as an effective conditioning regimen. Your current physical metrics are suboptimal for the sustained operation of powered armor. The G-forces alone would be a significant strain. Suboptimal. It was a polite way of saying he was weak. Scrawny. Utterly unprepared. Izuku looked down at his own thin arms. JOCSDA was right. A hero needed to be strong, not just in mind, but in body. All Might had spent months training his body to handle One for All. This would be Izuku's equivalent. Not just a workout, but a purpose-driven reclamation. Okay, Izuku said, a new fire kindling in his gut. Okay. Let's do it. And so, his 10-month thesis began. Months 1 to 3, the grind. Every morning before dawn and every afternoon after school, Dagoba Beach became Izuku's classroom, his gym, and his quarry. The scale of the task was Herculean. The stench of brine and decay was a physical presence, clinging to his clothes and hair. The work was brutal, soul-crushingly repetitive. He hauled waterlogged tires, dragged rusted refrigerators across the sand, and painstakingly dismantled defunct electronics, his fingers growing calloused and strong. But this was no ordinary cleanup. It was a guided, intellectual exercise. As he worked, a small, discreet earpiece fed him a constant stream of information from JOCSDA. While his muscles screamed from the strain of lifting a broken engine block, the AI was delivering a university-level lecture on metallurgy. Asterisk, the primary alloy of this engine block is A380 aluminum, asterisk. She would explain, her voice a calm counterpoint to his ragged breathing. While useful for its casting properties, it lacks the tensile strength required for the primary load-bearing structures of the Vanguard armor. However, the salvaged titanium connecting rods are of a higher grade. His mind, once a sponge for hero trivia, was now absorbing the fundamental laws of the universe. While sorting tangled copper wires, he learned about electrical engineering and power transference. While staring at the stars after a grueling evening session, JOCSDA would explain astrophysics and the principles of the repulsor technology he would one day build. It was a process Mr. Stark had termed neural-assisted learning. JOCSDA wasn't just talking at him. She was interfacing with his brain's learning centers, structuring the data in a way that allowed for maximum retention. At night, he wouldn't just sleep. He'd enter a guided REM cycle where the day's lessons were consolidated. He'd dream in equations and blueprints. His room began to transform. The All Might posters remained, but they were now surrounded by whiteboards covered in complex physics problems. His notebooks, once filled with sketches of heroes, were now dense with chemical formulas and armor schematics. His mother, Inko, watched the change with a mixture of pride and confusion. Her son, once so directionless and depressed, was now consumed by a fierce, scholarly passion. The constant deliveries of insulated tools, processing chips, and strange chemical compounds were odd, but he explained them away as projects for a new advanced science club. She was just happy to see the light back in his eyes. The physical changes were just as dramatic. The soft, undefined lines of his body hardened. His back and shoulders broadened. The perpetual slouch was replaced by the straight posture of someone who could carry heavy burdens. For the first time in his life, he was not just building his mind, he was building his body to match. Months 4 to 6, the first spark. By the 6th month, a significant portion of the beach was clear. The mountain of salvaged materials in a rented lockup nearby was growing, and Izuku's understanding had reached a critical threshold. It was time. The construction of the first arc reactor took place in the dead of night. In a corner of his room he had painstakingly sound and light-proofed with insulating foam. It was a nerve-wracking, delicate surgery of technology. The parts were a hybrid of his own making, scavenged palladium coils meticulously rewound, a housing forged from salvaged and refined scrap, and high-purity components ordered with Stark funds from specialist suppliers across the globe, delivered via a complex web of shell corporations and P.O. boxes set up by JOCSDA. The vibrational dampeners are in place. Izuku muttered, his brow beaded with sweat, his hands surprisingly steady as he used a pair of precision tweezers to seat a glowing blue energy conduit. JOCSDA, run final diagnostics. All systems are nominal, she replied from the sphere hovering over his shoulder. Energy buffers are stable. The palladium core is ready for cold fusion initiation. Your calculations on the energy-to-matter conversion rate are sound. There is a 98.7% probability of a successful and stable reaction, a 1.3% chance of failure. When failure meant a localized electromagnetic pulse that would black out the neighborhood, or, best-case scenario, a small, contained explosion. He took a deep, shuddering breath. This was the heart of everything. Without it, the armor was just a metal coffin. Initiate sequence on my mark, he commanded, his voice barely a whisper. He placed the final containment ring, the metal cool against his fingertips. Mark, initiating. A low hum filled the room, the same sound he had heard when JOCSDA first arrived, but this time it was coming from the device on his workbench. A single spark of white light ignited in the center of the palladium core. For a terrifying second, it flickered, threatening to die. Izuku held his breath. Then, the spark caught. It blossomed into a brilliant, stable, cerulean glow. The hum smoothed out into a clean, silent thrum of immense power. Light, pure and beautiful, pulsed from the device, casting dancing blue shadows on the walls of his room. Izuku stared, mesmerized. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He had taken junk, theories, and his own two hands, and he had created a star. A small, contained, perfectly stable star. He let out a shaky laugh, a sound of pure, unadulterated triumph. He had done it. Months 7 to 9, forging the Vanguard. With a power source secured, the next 3 months were a blur of frantic, inspired creation. The lockup he had rented became his secret forge. Using a high-powered plasma cutter and a custom-built 3D printer that worked with metallic alloys, he began to build his first suit. This was not the sleek, hot rod red and gold of the Iron Man armor from Stark's files. Izuku's heroic sensibilities were different. His analysis notebooks had always focused on rescue, defense, and minimizing collateral damage. His suit would reflect that. He called it the Mark I Vanguard armor. The design was bulky, pragmatic, and utterly without vanity. The primary plating was a layered composite of titanium and steel alloys scavenged from the beach, reinforced with a carbon fiber weave of his own design. It was thick, angular, and built to withstand impacts from collapsing buildings rather than energy blasts. The color scheme was a deep, matte forest green with black accenting on the joints and undersuit. Colors for a hero who worked in the grit and grime, not one who posed for cameras. He pored over Stark's designs, but he didn't just copy them. He adapted. He cross-referenced Stark's repulsor technology with his own analysis of the pro-hero snipe's quirk, creating smaller, less destructive, but more precise repulsor blasts, ideal for disabling targets or clearing rubble without leveling a city block. He integrated a suite of advanced sensors, thermal imaging, sonar, and structural integrity scanners, tools for a search and rescue operator, not just a warrior. The gauntlets were reinforced with hydraulic systems, not just for punching, but for prying open crushed doorways and lifting heavy debris. Every weld, every line of code for the user interface, every single wire was his own work. JOCASDA provided the knowledge, but Izuku provided the will, the labor, and the soul. He poured all his heroic aspirations, all his years of study and frustration, into the metal. This armor was his answer to a world that had told him he was powerless. Finally, 1 week before the UA entrance exam, it was complete. It stood in the center of his lockup, massive and imposing. The arc reactor, a slightly smaller and more refined version of his first prototype, glowed softly from its chest housing. It was ugly. It was clumsy. It was the physical manifestation of his dream. The night of the first test flight was clear and moonless. He suited up at the now pristine Dagoba beach, the rhythmic sound of the waves a calming backdrop to his hammering heart. The process of the armor encasing him was slow and mechanical, a series of heavy, satisfying clunks as plates locked into place. All systems online. JOCSDA's voice sounded inside his helmet, her consciousness now integrated into the suit's mainframe. Life support active. Repulsor output at 10%. Izuku's head-up display flickered to life, a sea of data overlaid on the dark landscape. He could see the heat signatures of nesting gulls on the cliffs and the stress points in the nearby seawall. He took a tentative step, the hydraulics whining as they compensated for the suit's immense weight. It felt like piloting a small tank. "Okay, Izuku," he whispered to himself. Just like the simulations, he raised his hands, palms down, and drew a deep breath. "Boot jets fire on my mark." "Low power." "Understood, Mark." A soft whump and a burst of controlled energy from the soles of his feet lifted him a few inches off the sand. He wobbled, flailing his arms wildly before crashing back down with a heavy thud. "Okay." Again. The next attempt got him a few feet in the air before he spun out of control and landed on his back, the impact jarring but completely absorbed by the armor's frame. He lay there for a moment, staring up at the stardusted sky, and began to laugh. He tried again. And again. He was clumsy, awkward, and completely uncoordinated. But with each attempt he learned. He felt the delicate balance of the thrusters, the subtle shifts in momentum. JOCSDA provided real-time feedback, correcting his posture, adjusting power output, and then it clicked. He rose from the ground, this time smoothly. He hovered 10, then 20, then 50 feet in the air. The wind whistled past his helmet. He looked down at the clean sand of the beach he had reclaimed, at the distant lights of the city. For his entire life, he had been grounded, looked down upon, small. But now he was flying. A sob of pure, unadulterated joy escaped his lips. He pushed the thrusters, just a little, and surged forward. The acceleration pressed him back into his seat. He soared over the waves, the sea spray misting against his visor. He was free. He was powerful. Not because of a gift he was born with, but because of what he had built. Month 10, the reckoning. The final month was spent on refinement. He practiced with the suit every night, mastering flight, calibrating the repulsors, and learning the nuances of the sensor suite. But one final task remained, perhaps the most terrifying of all. He had to tell his mother. She knew something was happening. Her son was stronger, more confident, and spent every waking moment on his mysterious project. The sheer cost of electricity his room was now drawing was impossible to ignore. Her worry, a constant, simmering pot in the back of her mind, was about to boil over. He chose a quiet evening, a few days before the exam. He led her into his room, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. JOCSDA's sphere hovered nearby, a silent observer. "Mom," he began, his voice shaky. There's something I have to show you. And please, just try not to freak out." That was, of course, the exact wrong thing to say. Inko's eyes widened with worry. "Izuku, what is it? Are you in trouble?" No, nothing like that." He took a deep breath. "You know how I've always wanted to be a hero, more than anything?" She nodded, her expression softening with a familiar ache of sympathy. "Of course, sweetie. Well, I found a way. A different way." He unbuttoned the top of his shirt. Inko gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. There, nestled in a discreet, bio-integrated housing unit in the center of his chest, was the arc reactor. It pulsed with a soft, steady blue light, a healthy, artificial heartbeat visible through the thin layer of protective casing. "Izuku," she breathed, her voice trembling. What is that?" "It's a power source," he explained quickly, trying to keep his voice calm and reassuring. "It's called an arc reactor. It's perfectly safe, it's shielded, and it powers my project." He gestured to his computer, where he had pulled up the schematics for the Vanguard armor. "For the last 10 months, I haven't just been cleaning the beach. I've been studying. And building." He explained everything. Not about Tony Stark or other universes. That was too much, too unbelievable. He framed it as a discovery, an inspiration he'd had, a technological path to heroism that no one had ever taken. He told her about the knowledge he had acquired, the armor he had built, the flight he had mastered. Inko sank onto his bed, her mind reeling. Her son, her quirkless, fragile son, had installed a futuristic power plant in his own body and built a suit of flying armor in secret. The mother in her was screaming. It was dangerous. It was reckless. It was insane. But the woman who had watched her son's spirit die 10 months ago saw something else. She saw the fire in his eyes, brighter and more intense than it had ever been, even as a child. She saw the quiet confidence in his posture, the way he spoke of complex physics with an easy authority. The despair that had clung to him like a shroud was gone, burned away by the light of his own creation. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't just tears of fear. They were tears of awe. Of pride. Of a deep, heart-wrenching love for the incredible, brilliant young man her son had become. "You're really going to do it, aren't you?" she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're going to take the UA exam." Izuku knelt before her, his expression earnest and unwavering. "I am. But I'm not going to be like All Might, Mom. I can't be. I won't be a hero who just punches things. I'll be a new kind of hero, one who builds. One who protects. One who proves that it's not about the power you're born with." He placed a hand over the glowing reactor in his chest. "It's about the power you make for yourself." Inko looked at her son, at his calloused hands, his determined eyes, and the steady, man-made star in his chest, and she finally understood. Her little boy was gone. In his place was an engineer, an inventor, a pioneer, a hero. She pulled him into a fierce, trembling hug, burying her face in his shoulder. Just be careful, Izuku," she sobbed. "Please promise me you'll be careful." He hugged her back, the solid frame of his newly forged body a comfort to them both. "I will, Mom," he promised, his voice resonating with a certainty that settled her deepest fears. "I promise." He had spent the last 10 months on his thesis. Now, it was time to defend it. The day of the UA High entrance exam dawned crisp and clear. For thousands of teenagers across Japan, it was a day of reckoning, a single, high-stakes crucible that would determine the course of their lives. The air crackled with nervous energy, with the low thrum of barely contained quirks, with the scent of ozone, sugar, and sheer ambition. Izuku Midoriya felt that energy, but it was a distant hum against the focused, silent thrum of the arc reactor in his chest. He stood before the colossal gates of UA, a landmark he had only ever seen in pictures, and felt not the crushing inadequacy of his past, but the quiet, heavy certainty of his present. He was not here to ask for a chance. He was here to demonstrate a thesis. He was dressed in a simple tracksuit, but he was far from unequipped. In his right hand, he carried a large, heavy-duty briefcase. It was forged from the same dark green, matte finish alloy as his armor, reinforced at the corners, with a complex-looking locking mechanism at the top. It was utterly devoid of branding or decoration, a purely functional object that drew more than a few curious stares. It was heavy, and the balanced, rhythmic swing of his steps as he carried it spoke of the strength he had built over the last 10 months. "Oh, Deku!" The voice was a familiar explosion of gravel and contempt. Izuku stopped and turned. Katsuki Bakugo stood a few feet away, his hands shoved in his pockets, his crimson eyes narrowed into slits of pure, undiluted aggression. His gaze flickered from Izuku's face, noting the new, subtle confidence there, down to the strange briefcase. "Don't tell me you're actually trying out!" Bakugo sneered, a plume of smoke curling from his lips. "What's in the box, nerd? Your collection of hero action figures? You gonna bore the robots to death?" The old Izuku would have flinched. He would have stammered, shrunk into himself, and offered a dozen apologies for the crime of existing in Bakugo's vicinity. That Izuku was a ghost. The new Izuku simply met his gaze, his expression calm. "It's support gear, Kaken," he said, his voice even. "Everyone's allowed to use support gear." Bakugo's eyes widened slightly at the lack of a stammer, the sheer audacity of the direct response. He took a menacing step forward. "There's no support gear in the world that's gonna help a quirkless, useless wannabe like you. You're a pebble. Stay out of my way, or I'll blast you into dust before the test even starts." He shoved past Izuku, his shoulder intentionally slamming into his. Izuku braced himself, the impact barely moving him. He watched Bakugo stomp away, a walking thundercloud of pride and fury. He felt a pang of the old fear, a conditioned reflex, but it was quickly overwritten by a new, steely resolve. He was done being a pebble. Today, he would prove he could move mountains. The written portion of the exam was held in a massive auditorium. As the papers were distributed, Izuku felt a surge of calm. The questions were a mix of mathematics, logic, literature, and science. To the boy he had been 10 months ago, it would have been challenging. To the boy who had absorbed the equivalent of multiple PhDs in theoretical physics and advanced engineering, it was rudimentary. He moved through the questions with a quiet, relentless efficiency. Complex equations resolved themselves in his mind's eye. Physics problems involving quark trajectories and force vectors were simple calculations. He finished with nearly half the allotted time remaining, double and triple-checking his work not out of uncertainty, but out of a newfound sense of professional diligence. He was the last to enter the auditorium and one of the first to hand in his completed exam, earning a surprised but impressed nod from the proctor. Next came the practical exam briefing. The examinees were herded into another, even larger hall, the lights dimming to focus on a massive screen and a stage. The flamboyant, leather-clad pro-hero, President Mike, burst into the spotlight, his voice quirk booming through the speakers. "Hello, everybody! Welcome to today's live performance! Can I get a hey?" Silence. Tough crowd. President Mike muttered, before launching into a high-energy explanation of the practical exam. The screen behind him displayed 4 silhouettes of robotic villains, labeled with point values, 1, 2, and 3. The name of the game is to use your awesome quirks to rack up villain points by taking down these faux villains in our massive urban replica battle centers. It's a citywide slugfest, so bring your A-game. As President Mike spoke, Izuku's eyes were glued to the schematics. He began muttering, a habit he hadn't quite managed to shake, but the content had changed. "Okay, so the 1-pointers are swarm units, lightweight chassis, probably aluminum alloy, primary sensor cluster in the head unit, likely vulnerable to a focused EMP or joint targeting. The 2 pointers have heavier armor, likely steel composite, tread-based locomotion. Weak points will be the hydraulic actuators for the arms. The 3-pointer is the real challenge. Flying unit, probably uses turbine engines. A kinetic impact from above would be the most effective takedown strategy, or disrupt the gyroscopic stabilizers. And you, with the messy green hair! The spotlight swiveled and slammed down on Izuku, making him jump. A tall, well-built young man with dark blue hair and glasses stood up from a few rows away, his arm chopping the air with rigid precision. You have been muttering this entire time. It is distracting and disrespectful to the other examinees. If you believe this to be some sort of game, then you should leave this sacred institution immediately. All eyes turned to Izuku. He felt a hot flush of embarrassment, but he forced it down. He stood up, giving a slight bow. My apologies, he said, his voice clear and steady. I was merely analyzing the targets. It won't happen again. The blue-haired boy, Tenya Ida, looked momentarily taken aback by the straightforward, non-flustered response. He chopped the air again. An admirable, if distracting, dedication to strategy. I see. I withdraw my complaint and also offer my apologies for the interruption. He sat down with a stiff, formal bow. President Mike, unfazed, continued. Righteous, examinee 7111. Now, as I was about to say, there's one more thing. A 4th type of villain. The arena gimmick. The 0-pointer. The screen showed a colossal, building-sized silhouette. This big fella is worth 0 points. He's an obstacle, a hurdle. My advice? Run away! The lights came up, and the examinees were dismissed to their assigned battle centers. As Izuku walked towards the bus for Battle Center B, he overheard the chatter around him. Did you see that guy? He was analyzing the robots like a pro. Yeah, but what's his quirk? And what's with the weird suitcase? Izuku clutched the handle of the briefcase, its familiar weight a comfort. They would see soon enough. The gates of Battle Center B were titanic, sealing off a sprawling, meticulously crafted cityscape. Izuku stood with the other examinees, a sea of nervous faces and twitching, power-filled limbs. He spotted the kind-faced brunette girl from the auditorium entrance, the one he'd almost tripped in front of. She was bouncing on the balls of her feet, trying to psych herself up. He saw Ada, stretching with militaristic precision. Izuku found a small, clear space near the back of the crowd. He set the briefcase down and knelt beside it, his fingers running over the lock. All systems are green, Izuku. JOCSDA's voice echoed softly through his discreet earpiece. The Vanguard is primed for rapid deployment. I have already begun a preliminary scan of the city for structural weaknesses and ambush points. Copy, Izuku whispered back. And begin! President Mick's voice screamed from unseen speakers. The crowd surged forward, a tidal wave of quirks and ambition. A boy with engine-powered legs shot off the starting line. A girl with purple hair that elongated like whips lashed out to pull herself forward. Izuku was left in the dust, alone before the massive gates. What are you waiting for? There are no countdowns in a real fight. Go, go, go! Izuku didn't panic. This was part of the plan. He needed space. With a deep breath, he pressed his thumb to the briefcase's lock. It hissed open. It did not open like a normal suitcase. It unfolded. With a series of swift, complex, and perfectly synchronized mechanical movements, the case blossomed outwards, revealing the densely packed components of the Vanguard armor. Motorized arms extended, snapping the leg pieces around his calves and thighs. The torso unit lifted and clamped around his chest, the arc reactor seating itself with a soft thump against its housing. Gauntlets slid over his hands and arms, and finally, the helmet descended over his head, sealing him in. The world outside was replaced by the cool, blue glow of the head-up display. Data streams flowed at the periphery of his vision. A 360-degree sensor map materialized in the top corner. Vanguard Armor Mark I online, JOCSDA announced inside his helmet. All systems nominal. Welcome back, Izuku. He stood up, the hydraulics and the suit's joints whining softly as they took the immense weight. He was no longer Izuku Midoriya, the small, quirkless boy. He was a pilot in a 10-foot-tall, half-ton suit of powered armor. He was the vanguard. "Time to go to work," he said, and with a controlled, low-power burst from his boot jets, he launched himself into the city, landing a block away with a ground-shaking thud that cracked the pavement. He immediately came upon a trio of one-pointers menacing another examinee. The other student, whose quirks seemed to involve creating small, weak energy blasts, was struggling. "JOCSDA analysis," Izuku commanded. "Targets acquired. Lightweight chassis confirmed. Their targeting systems are linked. A localized electromagnetic pulse directed at the central unit should disable all three simultaneously. Execute." Izuku raised his left gauntlet. A small panel slid open, and a low thrumming sound emanated from it. EMP burst, 5-meter radius. A wave of invisible energy shot out. The red optics of the three robots flickered and died. They froze in place, inert. 3 points, Izuku noted, already moving past them. The other examinee stared at him, slack-jawed. He moved through the city with a cold, calculated efficiency. He wasn't a brawler, he was a surgeon. He encountered a heavily armored 2-pointer. Instead of trying to punch through its plating, he used his boot jets to leap onto its back, aimed a precision repulsor blast from his gauntlet at the unarmored joint of its neck, and severed its head with a shower of sparks. 2 points. He saw a group of 3-pointers, agile flying machines, strafing students below. He didn't engage them in a dogfight. Instead, he used JOCSDA's trajectory analysis, grabbed a piece of rubble, a chunk of concrete, a car, and used a powerful repulsor blast to launch it into the air like a missile, knocking 2 of the drones out of the sky. 6 points. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. But he was racking up points at a steady, respectable rate. 3, 5, 11, 19, 28, 36, 45. He was in the safe zone. He was passing. The 10 months of brutal, relentless work were paying off, and then the ground began to shake. A low, guttural groaning sound echoed through the artificial canyons, followed by the screech of tortured metal. A shadow fell over the street, vast and absolute. From behind a skyscraper, the 0-pointer emerged. It was biblical in scale. It dwarfed the surrounding buildings, a titan of chrome and steel that blotted out the sun. Its single, massive red optic scanned the battlefield, and its colossal arms swiped at the tops of buildings, sending debris raining down onto the streets below. The effect was instantaneous and universal. Panic. The other examinees, who had been fighting with such bravado moments before, turned and fled. Their quirks, so effective against the smaller robots, were useless against this behemoth. It was an obstacle, just as President Mike had said. An unwinnable fight. Izuku felt a jolt of primal fear himself. The sheer scale of it was beyond anything his simulations had prepared him for. "Warning," JOCSDA's voice said, calm as ever. "The 0-point robot's power signature is off the charts. Direct engagement is ill-advised." "Got it. Avoid and retreat," Izuku agreed, his suit turning to follow the fleeing crowd. But then he heard a cry. "Ow! My leg!" His head snapped towards the sound. It was the kind-faced brunette girl. She had tripped, and a large slab of concrete, dislodged by the 0-pointer's rampage, had pinned her leg to the ground. She was directly in the Titan's path. In that instant, the exam, the points, the strategic analysis, it all vanished. His mind went silent, replaced by a single, deafening roar of instinct. The same instinct that had sent him rushing towards the sludge villain. She needs help. While everyone else was running away, the vanguard armor turned and ran back, its heavy footfalls thundering against the pavement. "Izuku, your current trajectory puts you on a direct intercept course with the 0-pointer, JOCSDA stated. "The probability of mission success via direct assault is 2.3%. I'm not assaulting it," Izuku grunted, pushing the suit's motors to their limit. "I'm neutralizing it. JOCSDA, I need a solution." Analyze the robot's weight distribution, the structural integrity of the street, and the energy output of my repulsors. Find me a way to take it down without a direct confrontation. Data flooded his HUD. Schematics of the city's foundations, stress vectors of the asphalt, and power scaling charts for his gauntlets. For a fraction of a second, the sheer volume of information was overwhelming. Then his mind, honed by months of neural-assisted learning, saw it. It was a crazy, desperate, and brilliant plan. It was a zero-point solution. "I've got it!" he yelled, skidding to a halt about 20 yards from the trapped girl and 100 yards from the advancing robot. He turned to face the behemoth, planting his feet wide. "Ochako Uraraka," he said, his voice broadcast through the suit's external speakers. "Don't move! I'm going to get you out of there!" The girl, Uraraka, looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe at the green metal giant who had come back for her. Izuku slammed his gauntlets together, diverting all non-essential power to his primary weapon systems. The arc reactor in his chest glowed with blinding intensity, visible even through the armor plating. Vents on his back hissed as they expelled superheated air. "Warning! Repulsor systems are exceeding 150% of recommended maximum output," JOCSDA cautioned. "Sustained use will cause catastrophic damage to the gauntlet assemblies. Just give me one shot!" Izuku roared. He wasn't aiming at the robot. He was aiming at the ground directly in front of it. He drove his fists downward, slamming his supercharged repulsors into the asphalt. It was not a blast. It was a focused, sustained torrent of pure kinetic energy and thermal radiation. The street didn't explode. It melted. The asphalt and concrete liquefied in an instant, turning into a glowing, molten slag. The ground superheated and destabilized, creating a man-made sinkhole right in the zero-pointer's path. The robot's colossal metal foot, weighing thousands of tons, stepped onto the compromised ground. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a groan that shook the entire battle center, the Titan began to tilt. It listed to one side, its gyroscopic stabilizers screaming as they failed to compensate. It fell in agonizing slow motion, not forward onto Uraraka, but sideways, crashing into a row of unoccupied buildings with a cataclysmic, deafening impact that sent a mushroom cloud of dust and debris into the air. Silence. The battlefield was still. The Titan was down. Izuku's work wasn't over. The gauntlets of his suit were glowing red-hot, smoke pouring from the overloaded circuits. He ignored the damage warnings flashing across his HUD and rushed to Uraraka's side. His faceplate retracted with a hiss, revealing his sweat-soaked, determined face. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice strained. She could only nod, speechless. "This might be a little rough," he said. He didn't try to brute force the slab of concrete. He deployed 4 thin, high-tensile-strength microcables from his forearm, attaching them to the corners of the slab. Then, with a gentle, controlled pulse from his boot jets and the suit's internal hydraulics, he lifted the concrete a few feet into the air, hovering it there for a moment before setting it down safely a dozen yards away. His movements were delicate, precise, the actions of a rescuer, not a fighter. Just as he helped Uraraka to her feet, a blaring horn echoed through the city. "Time's up!" Izuku's suit, its systems pushed far beyond their limits, finally gave out. With a final hiss of depressurizing air, the armor locked up, and he collapsed to one knee, utterly exhausted but filled with a profound sense of accomplishment. In a darkened observation room high above the city, a group of figures watched the screens with stunned silence. "Well, I'll be," President Mike said, his usual bombastic persona gone, replaced by simple awe. "That kid took down the zero-pointer. He received no points for it," said a tired, logical voice. It was Shota Aizawa, his eyes wide and bloodshot, fixed on the screen showing Izuku. "But look at this," he replayed the final moments, highlighting Izuku's rescue of Uraraka. His primary objective was never the robot. It was the rescue. He analyzed the threat, calculated a solution that resulted in 0 collateral damage to the examinee, and then immediately shifted to aid. It was reckless, but it was ruthlessly logical. A small, white-furred creature in a suit, Principal Nizu, giggled, his black eyes gleaming with intellectual delight. "Oh, it was more than logical, Aizawa! It was brilliant! A quirk can break a wall, but a mind like that can reshape the battlefield itself. To see the problem not as the obstacle, but as the tool for the solution. What a fascinating mind!" In the back of the room, a skeletal, emaciated figure in an oversized yellow suit watched a dedicated monitor. Tashinori Yagi, All Might in his true form, stared at the image of the green-armored boy kneeling in the dust, his faceplate retracted. He watched the boy's sheer determination, the fierce intelligence in his eyes, the selfless heroism of his actions. His own words from that rooftop echoed in his memory, a bitter, shameful poison. No, I don't think you can become a hero without a quirk. He had been so wrong. So profoundly, devastatingly wrong. He hadn't just misjudged the boy's potential. He had failed to see the hero that was already standing right in front of him, begging for a single word of encouragement. Power wasn't just a quirk passed down through generations. Power was a mind that could forge a star in a high school student's bedroom. Power was the will to build a suit of armor from scrap and dreams. Power was the heart that would run back into the fire for a stranger. A single, hot tear traced a path down his gaunt face, a testament to his monumental error. He had been looking for a worthy vessel for his power. He should have been looking for a worthy hero, and he had turned one away. On the screen, the final scores began to tally. Examinee 7111, Izuku Midoriya. Villain points, 45. Rescue points, 60. Total, 105. He had not only passed. He had taken first place. The acceptance letter from Yeihai didn't arrive in a standard envelope. It came in a small, sleek package. When Izuku opened it, a disc slid out, projecting a hologram of a beaming, muscle-bound All Might. I am here. As a projection, the hero boomed. The sight of his idol, in his prime, still sent a jolt through Izuku's heart, but it was a complex sensation now, a mixture of childhood reverence and the bitter memory of their rooftop encounter. All Might enthusiastically recounted the results of the practical exam, praising the top scorer for his incredible performance. When he finally announced Izuku's name as the number 1 student, with a staggering 60 rescue points on top of his 45 villain points, Inko Midoriya, watching over his shoulder, burst into a fresh flood of happy, hysterical tears. But it was the next part of the message that made Izuku's own eyes well up. All Might's projected image seemed to shrink, the confident posture slumping slightly, the bright smile fading into something more somber and genuine. Young Midoriya, he said, his voice softer, devoid of its usual bombast. I was in the observation room during your exam. Your actions, your selfless courage in the face of overwhelming odds. It was the very definition of what it means to be a hero. You proved something to all of us that day. And you proved me. He paused, the hologram flickering as if struggling with the words. You proved me wrong. Come, young Midoriya. This is your hero academia. The projection fizzled out, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. The validation was so profound, so complete, that Izuku felt a weight he hadn't even realized he was still carrying lift from his soul. He had done it. He had not only passed, he had earned the respect of the man who had shattered his world. A week later, he stood before the gargantuan door of Class 1A, the same heavy-duty briefcase in his hand. He took a deep breath, the steady thrum of the arc reactor a comforting rhythm in his chest. This was it. The first day of the rest of his life. He slid the door open to a scene of controlled chaos. He immediately recognized the stern, blue-haired boy from the exam, Tenya Ida, arguing with a familiar, explosive blonde. It is disrespectful to the esteemed upperclassmen who previously utilized these desks. Ida chopped the air, his voice rigid with propriety. Like I give a crap about some extras, Bakugo snarled, his feet propped up on the desk, a look of supreme arrogance on his face. What junior high you from, you stuck up? His tirade cut off as his crimson eyes landed on Izuku, standing hesitantly in the doorway. Bakugo's entire demeanor shifted, his arrogance curdling into pure, unadulterated rage. You! He roared, leaping to his feet with such force that his chair screeched against the floor. Every head in the classroom whipped around to stare. DKU! How the hell did you get in here? You're quirkless. You must have cheated. The word hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Quirkless. It was a brand, a slur in this superpowered society. Izuku saw the other students' expressions shift from curiosity to confusion, and in some cases, to faint, dismissive pity. He felt a familiar cold dread coil in his stomach. He had spent 10 months building himself into something more, but in one word, Bakugo was trying to tear it all down. Before he could respond, the kind-faced brunette from the exam, Ochako Uraraka, bounced over to his side, her eyes sparkling. "Oh, it's you! The briefcase guy. Wow, what you did in the exam was amazing. That takedown of the zero-pointer, and then whoosh, you just lifted that concrete like it was nothing. It was so cool." She beamed at him, completely ignoring Bakugo's accusation. Ida, also recognizing him, marched over, his movements stiff and formal. "I too must commend you. While I misjudged your character at the orientation, your strategy during the practical exam was flawless. You deduced the hidden objective of the test, the accumulation of rescue points. I was completely oblivious. As a fellow student, I am in your debt." He bowed a perfect 90 degrees. Izuku was floored. In the span of 30 seconds he had gone from being publicly shamed to being praised by two of his new classmates. The cold dread in his stomach began to dissipate, replaced by a warm, unfamiliar glow. Bakugo, however, was only growing more enraged at being ignored. "I'm not asking them, I'm asking you, Deku," he seethed, getting right in Izuku's face. "There's no way a pathetic loser like you passed without some kind of trick. So start talking before I blast that stupid look off your face." Izuku looked into Bakugo's furious eyes, saw the same bully who had tormented him for a decade, and felt nothing. The fear was gone. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. "I didn't cheat, Kaken," Izuku said, his voice level and clear. The lack of a stutter seemed to infuriate Bakugo even more. "The exam allowed for the use of support equipment. My quirk is simply reliant on it." This was the cover story he and JOCSDA had carefully crafted. It was the truth, from a certain point of view. "Quirk?" Bakugo spat the word like it was poison. "What quirk? You don't have a quirk. If you're just here to make friends, then you can pack up your things and leave." A tired, monotone voice cut through the tension like a knife. Everyone turned to see a man with long, unkempt black hair and bloodshot eyes, lying on the floor behind the teacher's podium, wrapped in a yellow sleeping bag like a morbid caterpillar. "It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down," the man said, wriggling out of the sleeping bag and standing up. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in a week. "Life is not that long. You're not being rational enough." He introduced himself as Shota Aizawa, their homeroom teacher. Without any of the usual pleasantries, he tossed a bundle of gym uniforms onto his desk. "Put these on and meet me on the training grounds. We're having a quirk apprehension test." The students stood on the sun-drenched athletic field, a nervous energy rippling through the group. "A quirk apprehension test?" Uraraka questioned. "But what about the entrance ceremony? And orientation?" "Here at UA, we're not bound by silly traditions," Aizawa said, his tone flat. "You've all been using your quirks without proper guidance since you were children. This test will give me a rational baseline of your abilities." He turned his gaze to Bakugo. "Bakugo, you placed second in the practical exam. What was your best score for the softball throw in junior high?" 67 meters, Bakugo grunted. "Try it with your quirk." Aizawa tossed him a softball. Bakugo strode into the throwing circle, a wicked grin spreading across his face. He wound up, and with a thunderous explosion that ripped through the air, he launched the ball. "Die!" he screamed, for reasons known only to himself. The ball rocketed into the sky, leaving a trail of smoke. A few seconds later, Aizawa's phone beeped. He held it up, showing the result. 705.2 meters. The class erupted in gasps and cheers. "Whoa! So we get to use our quirks for real? This is gonna be fun!" A red-haired, sharp-toothed boy named Eijiro Kurishima exclaimed. Aizawa's eyes narrowed, a sinister grin forming on his face. "Fun, you say? You have 3 years to become heroes. You think it's all going to be fun and games? How about this? The student who ranks last in total points will be judged to have no potential and will be expelled." Immediately, panic exploded through the ranks. Expulsion on the first day? It was insane. It was terrifying. But it was also, as Aizawa would say, perfectly rational. This was UA High, the top hero course in the country. There was no room for dead weight. Izuku felt a jolt of anxiety, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of adrenaline. This was it. The first true test of his new identity. He glanced down at the briefcase at his feet. Aizawa had looked at it, then at him, and simply said, "If it's part of your quirk, it's allowed." The first test was the 50-meter dash. Izuku was paired with Ida. Ida crouched at the starting line, vents on his calves sputtering. Izuku, meanwhile, opened his briefcase, the now familiar whir of mechanics echoing as two sleek, green greaves and armored boots clamped over his lower legs. The starting pistol fired. Ida shot off like a bullet, his recipro burst clearing the distance in 3.04 seconds. Izuku, a moment later, activated the boot jets. With a controlled, powerful burst of blue energy, he rocketed across the track, his movements not as fluid as Ida's but brutally effective. His time, 4.13 seconds. Respectable. Better than his unassisted time would have been, by far. Next, the grip strength test. A boy with multiple arms, Mizo Shoji, scored an incredible 540 kilograms. Izuku slipped on one of his Vanguard gauntlets. He squeezed the device, and instead of relying on muscle, he engaged the micro-hydraulics within the gauntlet. The device whined as the pressure increased, the digital readout climbing higher and higher until it stopped with a definitive beep. The score was off the charts, the device unable to measure it. Aizawa simply wrote down error. Standing long jump? He cleared the sandbox entirely with a single, controlled leap from his boot jets. Repeated side steps? The powered boots allowed for rapid, explosive lateral movements, giving him a score that put him in the top half of the class. He was performing well. Consistently above average. He wasn't dominating, but he was proving his worth. But he could feel Aizawa's eyes on him. The tired, perceptive gaze was filled with skepticism. Aizawa was a man who valued logic and efficiency, and he saw Izuku's reliance on his toys as a potential weakness. He was waiting for a test where the tech wouldn't be enough. Finally, came the ball throw. One by one, his classmates showcased their incredible powers. Uraraka touched the ball, making it weightless, and threw it so high it achieved an infinity score. Aoyama, a flamboyant blonde boy, fired a laser from his navel to propel it. The powers were diverse, powerful, and utterly unique. Then it was Izuku's turn. He walked into the circle, the soft ball feeling mundane in his hand. He could use a repulsor blast from his gauntlet to launch it, but that felt uninspired. It was just brute force. He needed to show something else. He needed to show ingenuity. As he stood in the circle, an idea sparked, a fusion of Stark-level engineering and his own analytical mind. JOCSDA, he murmured, so low no one could hear. Access microfabricator schematics. I need a single-use, adhesive propulsion unit. Solid fuel, short burst. Can the gauntlet's internal fabricator handle it? The request is within established parameters, JOCSDA's voice sounded in his ear. Fabricating now. Estimated time, 7 seconds. To the outside world, Izuku was just standing there, concentrating. Bakugo scoffed from the sidelines. What's he gonna do, throw it with his robot hand? Pathetic. Izuku palmed the ball. From a nearly invisible slit on the palm of his gauntlet, a tiny, disc-shaped object, no bigger than a coin, was extruded and bonded to the surface of the ball. It was a microthruster, a marvel of miniaturization that had just been printed and assembled inside his glove. He took a deep breath, mimicking the wind-up of a professional pitcher he had analyzed countless times. He threw. His physical strength, much improved from 10 months of training, sent the ball flying in a high, powerful arc. It was a good throw, probably around 70 meters on its own. But then, just as it reached the apex of its arc, when it should have started to fall, Izuku spoke a single command word into his comms. Ignite. A tiny, brilliant flare of blue light erupted from the back of the ball. The microthruster fired, unleashing a burst of incredible acceleration. The ball, instead of falling, became a comet. It streaked across the sky, a thin trail of white smoke in its wake, going higher and further than Bakugo's had, disappearing into the azure expanse. The class was dead silent. Every jaw was on the floor. Aizawa's phone beeped. He stared at the screen for a long, silent moment, his tired eyes wide with something that looked suspiciously like shock. He turned the phone around. The screen displayed a single, glowing word, infinity. No way. Kaminari, an electric quirk user, whispered. He got the same score as Uraraka. Mina Ishido, a girl with pink skin and horns, squealed. Bakugo's face was a mask of disbelief and incandescent fury. He had been beaten. By Deku. At a test of raw power. It was impossible. It was an insult to the very fabric of his universe. DKU, you bastard! He screamed, his palms already sparking with explosions. You've been lying to me. You do have a quirk. What the hell was that? He lunged forward, murder in his eyes. Before he could take a second step, he was frozen in place, his body wrapped in a series of tough, gray bindings. Aizawa's scarf had shot out and ensnared him, and the teacher's eyes were glowing a menacing red, his long hair floating around his head. Stand down, Aizawa commanded, his voice lethally calm. I'm the one who decides how and when quirks are used here. And for the record, he added, his glowing red eyes deactivating Bakugo's quirk, I still haven't seen Midoriya use his. He released Bakugo, who stumbled, seething. Aizawa walked over to Izuku, his expression unreadable. He looked at Izuku's gauntlet, then at the sky where the ball had vanished. Midoriya, he said, his voice a low grumble. Your quirk registration file is unusual. It's listed as tech-based enhancement. It states that you are biologically quirkless, but possess a unique intellectual aptitude for creating and interfacing with advanced technology, which you then use to simulate quirk-like abilities. A mental quirk that manifests through machinery. Izuku's blood ran cold. He hadn't seen the file. JOCSDA, ever proactive, had not only managed his finances but had apparently also hacked the National Quirk Registry, creating a file for him that was both technically true and brilliantly misleading. His mind was his quirk. She had just given it a name. That's correct, Sensei, Izuku managed to say, his heart hammering. Aizawa stared at him for a long moment, his perceptive eyes searching for any hint of deception. Your quirk is dangerous, he said finally. Not because of its power, but because of its potential. A quirk that can be upgraded, adapted, and redesigned for any situation is a variable I can't easily quantify. You're a wild card. Don't make me regret letting you in. With that, he turned and walked back to the front of the class. All right, the test is over. Here are the results. A holographic leaderboard appeared in the air. Izuku scanned the list, his breath catching in his throat. He had placed fifth, just behind Todoroki and ahead of Tokoemi. He was in the top quarter of the class, and at the very bottom, in 20th place, was a short, purple-haired boy named Minoru Mineta, who was now sobbing hysterically. By the way, Aizawa said, a wicked grin spreading across his face as he dismissed the leaderboard. I was lying about the expulsion. It was a logical deception designed to make you push past your limits. The class erupted in a mixture of outrage and relief. Only a tall, black-haired girl named Momo Yayorozu seemed unsurprised. Of course it was a lie, she stated calmly. It was simply not a rational course of action for a teacher to take. As the students headed back to the locker rooms, Izuku felt a heavy, oppressive presence behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Bakugo cornered him against the wall of the school building, his body language radiating pure menace. His classmates gave them a wide berth, not wanting to get caught in the blast radius. We're not done, Deku, Bakugo growled, his voice dangerously low. I don't know what kind of cheap trick you pulled, and I don't care about that stupid file. I've known you my whole life. You're a bug, a pebble. And I'm going to find out what you're hiding. Izuku looked at the boy who had defined his world for so long. The fear, the awe, the desperate need for his approval. It was all gone, burned away by the forge at Dagoba Beach and the star in his chest. All that was left was a faint, lingering pity. There's nothing to find out, Kaken, Izuku said, his voice quiet but firm. It's like I told you before the exam. You were born with your power. I wasn't. So I had to build mine. He met Bakugo's furious gaze without flinching. You've been at the top your whole life without ever really trying. You've never had to. I've been at the bottom. I had to learn, and I had to work, and I had to build. You think you're strong because of your quirk? My strength isn't in my gear, Kaken. It's in the fact that I know how to build it. Can you say the same? He gently pushed past the stunned and speechless Bakugo, leaving him standing there amidst the silent shockwaves of his upended worldview. For the first time, Izuku Midoriya had not just stood up to his tormentor. He had surgically dismantled the very foundation of his superiority complex. He walked back towards the main building, the heavy briefcase feeling a little lighter in his hand. He had a long, difficult road ahead of him. He had classmates with incredible, godlike powers. He had a skeptical teacher watching his every move. And he had a childhood rival who was now more of a threat than ever. But as he walked, he could hear the excited chatter of his new friends, Uraraka and Ida, waiting for him up ahead. For the first time in his life, he wasn't alone. He had a place. And he had earned it, not with a power he was given, but with a quirk named ingenuity. The bus ride to the unforeseen simulation joint, or USJ, was a cacophony of teenage energy. The usual anxieties of the first week of school had begun to melt away, replaced by the excited chatter of a class starting to coalesce. Izuku sat between Ochako Uraraka and Tenya Ida, a comfortable, nascent friendship already forming among the trio. He was quiet, but for the first time in his life, it was a comfortable silence, not an invisible one. His mind, however, was anything but quiet. It was a whirlwind of analysis, a habit now supercharged by the Stark archives. He wasn't just looking at his classmates anymore. He was seeing complex systems of incredible potential. Kirishima's hardening, he thought, watching the red-haired boy laugh boisterously with Kaminari. Asterisk incredible defensive capability. But what's the upper limit of its kinetic absorption? Could it be augmented with a vibranium weave undersuit to disperse impact energy more efficiently? A support item that provides a real-time integrity reading could be crucial. Asterisk Ajui's frog quirk. Tsuyu, she said to call her Tsuyu, her camouflage, extended tongue, and wall clinging are perfect for infiltration and stealth rescue. But her body temperature is a weakness. A small, high-efficiency thermal regulator integrated into her hero costume could expand her operational range into colder climates. Asterisk. You're muttering again, Deku-kun, Uraraka said, her voice pulling him from his thoughts. She smiled, her cheeks rosy. What are you thinking so hard about? Izuku flushed, a reflex he was slowly learning to control. Sorry. I was just thinking about everyone's quirks. They're all so amazing. I was considering potential support equipment synergies. Ida adjusted his glasses, his expression one of intense seriousness. An excellent and proactive line of thought, Midoriya-kun. A hero must always be considering how to best utilize the assets at their disposal. Your dedication to the practical aspects of heroism is truly admirable. It's really cool, Uraraka added. It's like your brain is your quirk, you know? Izuku's smile became a little more genuine. Yeah. Something like that. The conversation was interrupted by Kirishima leaning over the back of his seat. Speaking of quirks, Midoriya, yours is wild. So you just think up awesome gear and build it? That's so manly. But hey, Bakugo, he said, turning to the blonde who was staring out the window, a permanent scowl etched on his face. Isn't it crazy that a guy like Midoriya has such a flashy, powerful quirk? You two seem to have some history. Bakugo didn't even turn around. We have no history, he snarled, his voice a low growl. He's just a pebble on the side of the road. Always has been. The lie was so blatant, so steeped in years of their shared, painful past, that Izuku felt a familiar pang. But it was distant now, an echo of a wound that was finally beginning to scar over. Their arrival at the USJ cut the tension. The facility was immense, a massive dome that housed a breathtaking collection of simulated disaster zones. They were greeted by the space hero, 13, their iconic suit making them an instantly recognizable and beloved figure. Welcome, everyone! 13 announced, their voice filtered through a synthesizer. I built this facility to prepare you for the realities of rescue work. Here you will learn to use your quirks to save people from floods, landslides, fires, and every other disaster you can imagine. It is a place to learn that a hero's power is not meant to fight villains, but to help those in need. It was a sentiment that resonated deep within Izuku's core. This was what the Vanguard armor was for. This was its primary purpose. As 13 continued their speech, Aizawa moved to their side. Alright, that's enough. Let's get started. But as he turned to the class, the lights in the massive facility flickered and died. The central water fountain sputtered and went still. A cold, unnatural silence fell over the dome. Then, in the center of the main plaza below them, the air began to warp. A swirling vortex of black and purple mist bled into existence, a cancerous stain on reality. It expanded, and from its depths, figures began to emerge. Dozens of them. Villains. Low-level thugs, mutated creatures, a motley and menacing army of darkness. 3 figures stood out. A man whose entire body, save for a single, baleful eye, was made of the same purple mist. A man covered in dismembered hands, his posture hunched and erratic, scratching furiously at his neck. And behind them, a hulking, monstrous creature. It was the size of a bear, with dark, purplish-black skin, an exposed brain, and dead, unblinking eyes. It stood utterly still, a mountain of muscle and menace. "Stay together and don't move!" Aizawa commanded, his voice sharp and devoid of its usual exhaustion. He pulled his yellow goggles over his eyes. 13. Protect the students. Kirishima took a step forward. "Whoa, are those fake villains? Like in the entrance exam? Stay back!" Aizawa barked, his capture weapon unfurling from around his neck. "Those are real." The reality of the situation crashed down on the students with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a drill. This was a genuine villain attack. The man made of mist, Kurojiri, spoke, his voice a smooth, chilling baritone. "The symbol of peace, All Might, was supposed to be here. It seems we've been the victims of a change in schedule. A pity, but no matter. Our mission remains the same." Before anyone could react, Aizawa launched himself down the massive stone staircase, his capture weapon flying. He was a dervish of motion, erasing quirks with his gaze, binding villains, and using their own momentum against them with brutal, balletic efficiency. He was one man against dozens, but he was holding them back. "We need to get out of here," Ida commanded, already herding the other students towards the entrance. 13 Sensei, but their escape was cut off. The purple mist that was Kurojiri materialized before them, a towering, formless obstacle. "I won't allow that," he said, his yellow eyes glowing in the gloom. "My role is to scatter you, and torture you to death." In the next instant, Bakugo and Kirishima leaped forward, launching an explosive, hardened assault on the villain. A massive cloud of smoke and debris erupted. "Did you get him?" Kirishima yelled. As the smoke cleared, Kurojiri was unharmed. "That was a close call. You students are golden eggs indeed." His misty form began to expand, swirling around them like a dark, sentient storm. "Now be scattered." The world dissolved into a maelstrom of purple and black. Izuku felt the disorienting, gut-wrenching sensation of being pulled apart and reassembled. He reached out, trying to grab onto Uraraka or Ida, but his hands found only empty space. Then, there was a sense of falling. He landed hard on a metal surface, the impact rattling his bones. He was alone. The swirling darkness receded, revealing he was on the deck of a large ship, surrounded by the churning waters of the USJ's shipwreck zone. But he wasn't alone for long. Villains began to surface from the water, their grinning faces filled with malicious intent. "Well, look what we got here." One of them, a man with shark-like features, sneered. "A little lamb, all by himself." Izuku scrambled backward, his heart hammering in his chest. His briefcase. He dropped it in the chaos of the warp. It was back at the entrance. He was defenseless. Quirkless. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. But then, another voice cut through the fear. A calm, logical, synthesized voice, speaking directly into his mind via a subcutaneous comms link he'd installed behind his ear. "Panic is a suboptimal response, Izuku. The briefcase is a deployment system, not the armor itself. The core components are nanite bonded to your undersuit. Initiate emergency deployment sequence, Vanguard 0. Izuku's eyes snapped open. Of course. A contingency he had designed with JOCSDA for exactly this scenario. He slammed a hand down on the arc reactor in his chest, pressing the housing in a specific sequence. The villains charged. The shark man was only a few feet away, his claws extended, and then Izuku's world lit up. The black fabric of his gym uniform seemed to ripple, then dissolve into a swarm of metallic nanites. They swarmed over his body with incredible speed, weaving and locking together, forming the familiar green and black plates of the Vanguard armor. The helmet flowed up and over his face, sealing him in with a pneumatic hiss. The blue light of the HUD flared to life. Vanguard armor mark I online. All systems nominal. The shark villain stopped dead in his tracks, his sneer replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. The boy he was about to tear apart was now a 10-foot-tall mechanical behemoth. What the hell? The villain stammered. Izuku didn't give him time to recover. He wasn't a frontline fighter like Aizawa, but he wasn't helpless. JOCSDA, optimal strategy. The enemy is water-based. A wide-angle, high-voltage electrical discharge is the most efficient method of incapacitation. Execute. Panels on Izuku's gauntlets and chest slid open, revealing arcing electrical nodes. Clear the pool. Izuku's modulated voice boomed. A massive jolt of electricity, calibrated to be non-lethal but debilitating, surged into the water. The villains screamed as their muscles seized up, and they floated to the surface, unconscious. He hadn't solved the problem. He had just bought himself time. And from his new vantage point, hovering 50 feet above the deck of the ship, he realized his true role in this battle. He wasn't just another combatant. He was the only one with a bird's eye view. JOCSDA. He commanded, carving a path into the sky, the dome of the USJ spreading out below him like a tactical map. Scan the entire facility. I want the location and status of every student, every teacher, and every villain. I am now Overwatch. Acknowledged. Initiating wide-spectrum scan, his HUD came alive with information. Dozens of red icons, villains, swarmed the different zones. And scattered among them, clusters of blue icons, his classmates. Multiple clusters of students are engaged and pinned down. JOCSDA reported. Landslide Zone. Todoroki Shoto and Hagakure Tura are handling their opposition effectively. Mountain Zone. Yairo Zumomo, Jiro Kyoka, and Kaminari Denki are surrounded. Izuku banked his flight path, heading for the mountain zone. Below him, he could see them. Yairozu was creating small shields, Jiro was trying to use her earphone jacks to listen for movements, and Kaminari was panicking. I can't! If I let loose, I'll zap you guys too! Kaminari yelled, clutching his head. Izuku opened a secure comms channel, patching into their school-issue communicators. Kaminari-san, this is Midoriya. Do you read me? Jiro's head snapped up. Midoriya? Where are you? Above you. I have eyes on the whole situation. Kaminari, there's a large villain to your northeast with what appears to be a rock-based quirk. He's heavily insulated. If you can lure him into the center of their group, you can use him as a living lightning rod. Yairozu-san, create an insulated blanket to shield Jiro-san. The effect of his clear, confident command was immediate. The panic receded, replaced by focused action. Yairozu quickly generated a thick rubber sheet. Jiro took cover. Kaminari, a grin spreading across his face, taunted the rock villain, drawing him in. 1.3 million volts! Kaminari screamed, unleashing a massive, indiscriminate discharge of electricity. It arced through the air, struck the rock villain, and chained through the rest of the thugs, dropping them all in a twitching heap. Whoa! It worked! Kaminari cheered before his brain short-circuited into his way mode. Student group secured. JOCSDA noted. Good work. Izuku said into the comms. Stay put. I'm assessing other threats. He was already moving, his eyes scanning the next crisis. Shipwreck zone. Azuri Tsuyu and Mineta Minoru are in the water, surrounded. Quirk analysis indicates the majority of the villains are ineffective on land. Izuku swooped down, hovering over the water. Tsuyu was doing her best to fight them off, while Mineta was sobbing and throwing his sticky purple balls in a panic. They were hopelessly outnumbered. He couldn't use another electrical pulse. His friends were in the water. But he didn't need to. He had other tools. Azuri-san, Mineta-san. On my mark, I'm going to create a vortex in the water. Swim for the edge of the pool, he commanded. He aimed the repulsors on his palms down at the water and fired them in a rotating sequence. The water began to churn, then spin, creating a powerful whirlpool. The villains, caught off guard, were sucked into the center, a swirling mass of bodies and flailing limbs. "Now!" he yelled. Tsuyu grabbed Mineta with her tongue and shot through the water, easily reaching the edge of the zone. Izuku then switched tools. A compartment on his shoulder opened, firing a small canister into the center of the vortex. The canister burst, releasing a rapidly expanding mass of thick, white, ridiculously sticky capture foam. It solidified almost instantly, trapping the entire group of villains in a single, immobile blob. Shipwreck zone secured. One by one, Izuku became a guardian angel, a strategic command center in the sky. He guided Ojiro through the fire zone, using his thermal scanners to identify villains hiding in the smoke. He provided a sonic distraction that allowed Tokoyami and Koda to get the drop on their attackers in the squall zone. He was a force multiplier, his tactical oversight and versatile, non-lethal technology turning the tide in every battle he influenced. But all the while, he was keeping one eye on the main plaza. On the brutal, terrifying fight between Aizawa and the villain's main force. His teacher was incredible, a whirlwind of controlled violence, but he was tiring. And the three main threats, the Handman, the Mistman, and the monster, hadn't even moved. He saw his chance. 13 was trying to contain Kurogiri while Ida and the others made a break for the doors. Ida was fast, but Kurogiri was faster, his warp gate cutting off the exit. JOCSDA, I need to create a 1-second opening. Kurogiri's body is a portal. Can a repulsive blast affect it? His physical form appears to be anchored by a metallic brace on his neck. A high-velocity, focused repulsive blast aimed near that brace will not damage him, but the resulting kinetic shockwave should disrupt the stability of his warp gate for approximately 1.2 seconds. That's all I need. Izuku banked hard, diving from the ceiling of the dome like a peregrine falcon. "Ida-kun, run!" he yelled over the comms. He fired. A thin, concentrated beam of blue energy shot across the USJ, not hitting Kurogiri, but striking the floor a foot in front of him. The impact created a miniature sonic boom, an invisible wave of force that slammed into the villain. Kurogiri's misty form wavered, the portal flickering like a dying television screen. It was enough. Ida, his engines roaring at full power, shot through the gap and out the USJ doors. He was clear. Help was on the way. Izuku pulled up, hovering near the ceiling again, his heart pounding. He had done it. But his relief was short-lived. Down below, the battle had taken a horrific turn. The hand-covered villain, Tamura Shigaraki, had finally moved. He had rushed Aizawa, and though the hero had dodged the villain's five-fingered grasp, the hulking monster, the Nomu, had intercepted him. Izuku watched in absolute horror as the Nomu caught Aizawa's fist. There was a sickening crunch. The creature twisted, and another snap echoed through the dome as it broke his other arm. Then, it grabbed his head and slammed him into the concrete, again and again and again. "Sensei!" Izuku screamed, the sound trapped within his helmet. He couldn't just watch. Not again. His flight path had been one of support, of strategy. But seeing his teacher being beaten to death flipped a switch in his mind. The same switch that had sent him running toward the sludge villain. "Izuku, direct engagement with that creature is suicide," JOCSDA warned, her voice laced with an electronic urgency he had never heard before. "Its physical readings they are comparable to All Might." "I don't care!" Izuku roared, pushing his thrusters to their maximum. "We have to do something." He dove, a green meteor of righteous fury. He didn't have a plan. All he knew was that he had to get the monster off of his teacher. He hit the Nomu with everything he had. A full-power, dual repulsor blast slammed into its back. The impact would have leveled a building. It barely made the creature flinch. It turned its head, its dead eyes fixing on Izuku, and swatted him out of the air like a fly. The world spun. Alarms blared in his helmet as he crashed into the stone steps, the impact throwing up a cloud of dust and shattering rock. "Warning! Multiple microfractures detected in the torso plating. Power output fluctuating," Izuku groaned, pushing himself up. The suit had saved his life, but it was damaged. And the Nomu was already turning back to Aizawa. "You're pretty strong," Shigaraki said, his voice a scratchy, childish rasp. But you're no All Might. Nomu, finished the teacher. Then crushed the toy. The Nomu raised a massive fist to deliver the final blow. But before it could land, the doors to the USJ were blown off their hinges. It's fine now, a familiar, booming voice declared. Because I am here. All Might stood in the doorway, but he wasn't smiling. His face was a mask of incandescent rage. In a blur of motion, he rescued Aizawa and moved the students, who had been watching in horror, to safety. Then he stood before the three main villains. It's over, All Might said, his voice dangerously low. Oh, but it's just getting started. Shigaraki giggled. We brought my pet, the anti-symbol of peace, Nomu, to kill you. The fight that followed was a clash of titans. The air cracked with the force of their blows. But something was wrong. Every punch All Might landed, a punch that should have turned a normal villain to paste, was simply absorbed. The Nomu's body rippled, but it didn't break. It countered with blows of its own, its strength matching All Might's, blow for blow. Izuku, his system slowly coming back online, watched in dawning horror. All Might was being pushed back. The creature's shock absorption quirk was negating his power. JUCSDA. Izuku whispered, his voice desperate. When I hit it, when it hit me, you were scanning it, right? There has to be something. A weakness. Anything. Analyzing. JOCSDA's voice was strained, processing gigabytes of data from their brief, violent encounter. Its cellular structure is hyper-regenerative. The shock absorption is not a nullification, but a rapid, localized redistribution of kinetic energy. The damage does occur, but it is repaired almost instantaneously. Wait, what? What is it? There is a bottleneck. The process, damage registration, energy redistribution, cellular regeneration, is not instantaneous. There is a nanosecond-level processing lag between stimulus and response. If multiple, high-impact events occur at the exact same location faster than the regeneration cycle can complete, the damage will accumulate. A weakness. Not in its body, but in its system. Izuku's mind raced. He had to get that information to All Might. He activated his suit's external speakers, pushing the volume to its maximum. All Might! He screamed, his voice echoing through the dome. The hero was locked in a grapple with the Nomu, their muscles straining. He glanced over at Izuku, his eyes wide. Its shock absorption isn't a shield. It's a regeneration quirk. Izuku yelled, forcing himself to his feet. IT has a limit. There's a processing lag. IT can't repair itself fast enough if you hit it in the same spot repeatedly, and with enough speed. Shigaraki's head snapped towards him. What did you say, you little cheat? But All Might heard. A flicker of understanding, of hope, crossed his face. He understood the principle. It wasn't about hitting harder. It was about hitting smarter and faster. He broke the grapple, pushing the Nomu back. Young Midoriya! He boomed, a true, brilliant smile finally breaking through his rage. I owe you one, he crouched, planting his feet. You may have heard these words before, he said, his body beginning to glow with a ferocious power. But I'll teach you what they really mean. He launched himself forward. Go beyond. Plus. Ultra. It wasn't one punch. It was hundreds. His fists became a blur, a storm of impacts so fast they seemed to occupy the same space at the same time. Each blow landed on the exact same spot on the Nomu's chest. The creature's body tried to absorb, to regenerate, but it couldn't keep up. The first punch was absorbed. The second made a crack. The 10th shattered the skin. The 50th pulverized the muscle. The 100th caved in its chest entirely. With a final, definitive blow that contained all his remaining power, All Might punched the Nomu so hard it was launched through the roof of the dome, a screaming speck disappearing into the sky. The resulting shockwave blew Shigaraki and Kurogiri off their feet. The battle was over. As the other pro-heroes arrived and the villains were rounded up, All Might stood in the center of the plaza, steam pouring off his body. He was at his limit. He gave the students a shaky thumbs up. Later, after the chaos had subsided and the students were being accounted for, All Might approached Shizuku, his form flickering as he struggled to maintain his muscle form. Young Midoriya! he said, his voice low and serious. That intel you provided, it was the key. Without it, I would have been fighting a battle of attrition I could not have won. You saved me. You saved all of us. Izuku, his helmet retracted, just shook his head, still trying to process everything. I just analyzed it. You were the one who fought. A hero's strength is not just in their fists, All Might said, placing a heavy hand on Izuku's shoulder. The metal of the Vanguard armor creaked under the weight. It is in their mind. In their heart. Today, you were not on the front lines, but you were the cornerstone of our defense. You have proven, beyond any doubt, that you are a new kind of hero. And we are lucky to have you. Looking around at his classmates, safe, accounted for, and looking at him with a newfound respect and awe, Izuku finally understood. He hadn't thrown a single punch that mattered. He hadn't overwhelmed anyone with raw power. But he had protected them. He had been a shield. He had been a strategist. He had been a vanguard. And for the first time, it felt like more than enough.